Star Wars Shatterpoint's about to come out, and I'm really excited for it. The terrain in the core box has some interesting features. The buildings have these slots in them that allow the gantries and bridges to fit in and slot into them. And that allows the terrain to be arranged in different ways with different bridges and things like that to keep the terrain really fresh. So I'm pretty excited for that, and I thought I would make myself a bridge while I'm waiting for it to come out that will work with this slotting system. This is going to be a really simple bridge that I'm going to make, but I will make it so it works with the size of the terrain for Shatterpoint, and also it will have keys in it to fit into the slots in the Shatterpoint terrain. So this is just going to be a wooden bridge, so it's going to look a little bit different from the other terrain, but I figured it's essentially a replacement for one of the original bridges that's been blown up. I'm going to start with the main support beams that run the length of the bridge, and for that I'm going to use coffee stirrer sticks, which are really cheap to find on eBay or Amazon. I just found 3 really straight ones, and I'm clipping them down to 120 mils because I have decided that 120 millimeters is going to be the length of my bridge. So I just want to give them a little bit of shape. So I'm going to chamfer off the corners on both ends, and I'm going to make that as even as possible between the 3 of them. So now to glue them together, I'm just using some PVA glue, and I'm going to glue them and line them up as best as I can to be accurate, and then weigh them down with some bits and pieces I have sitting around. So now while the support beams are drying, I'm going to do the cross beams. So the main cross beams are going to be 85 millimeters long. So I'm taking 4 more stirrer sticks and I'm going to cut them down to 85 millimeters each. And I'm going to have 2 at each end as the main cross beams. Now here I'm going to use my cutting mat to really help me out. So I want to be as square as possible, as much as I can with coffee stirrer sticks. So I get my support beams, I'm going to put them on the cutting mat and line them up with the grid. And then I'm using some blue tack to blue tack them in place and just adjust things so they're as square and lined up as possible with the grid on the cutting mat. So once I've dry fit everything and lined everything up, I'm going to use 2-part epoxy for the cross beams here. So I mix up some 2-part epoxy, I put that on the end of the support beams, and now I'm putting my cross beams on. So I just put those on and just nudge things around so everything's lined up as square as possible using that grid, because this is going to affect everything if it's not square. So once the main cross beams are dried, I'm now going to do my other cross beams. So for these ones, I'm going to cut them at an angle actually. So they're still going to be 85 millimeters long, but I'm using the grid on the cutting mat to sort of mark out them with an angle so that they have like a 15 millimeter offset. And then I'm just going to use the same offset for all of them. So I've cut 6 more of those at the angle. So I'm lining them up in sort of a V shape. So I'm going to have 3 cross beams on the left side of the bridge and 3 cross beams on the right side of the bridge. And then for them as well, I'm going to use the epoxy. So I epoxied all 6 of those down, keeping them as evenly spread as possible and at even angles so they looked as neat as possible. And once that's dry, that's all my support and cross beaming for the bridge done. Now I realize I kind of goofed a bit here. I've sort of gone way overboard with the epoxy. This is a wooden bridge and there's so many bits of epoxy sticking all over. It's really going to affect the finish of the bridge. So you'll see all these clumps of epoxy. So I've had to go back with my hobby knife and just really clean up all the epoxy and cut it off and scrape it off. Luckily, it comes off fairly well if you get under there with a knife. It's just taken me a whole bunch of time. Okay, now the bridge flooring. So for this, I'm going to take about 10 stirrer sticks and cut them down to 120 mils. So for me, 10 filled out the flooring of the bridge, but there was like little slots between them you could see. So once I've cut them down to 120 and cleaned them up a little bit and figured out my spacing and I'm happy with it, I'm just going to use PVA glue here and glue them all down to the cross beams. So once they're glued down, I'm just going to weigh them down again with some bits and pieces I have and let that fully dry. So now let's talk about the slotting system for Shatterpoint. So I don't have the core box yet, so AMG, hit me up. If you want to send me one, I'd really appreciate it. But I have it on good authority that the slots are about 80 millimeters long, 2 millimeters wide, and 2 millimeters deep. And I also have it on good authority that cocktail sticks fit in the slot perfectly. So what I'm using for the actual slots is I'm going to use the cocktail stick. So I'm cutting the ends off, and then with my hobby knife, I'm just going to shave down one side to make a flat side. And that's the side that's going to contact against the bridge. So it will glue in, and it won't be a curve. It'll be a flat that I can glue flat to flat. And then for everywhere else on the cocktail stick, I'm just going to use my file and sand down the surface, because the cocktail stick is exactly 2 millimeters diameter. And I want a little bit of wiggle room in case things don't perfectly line up. So that's why I'm filing down everything else. So once the cocktail sticks are prepared, I'm going to use super glue to glue them down to the bridge. So I'm going to use the grid on the cutting mat again to line everything up as squarely as possible. And then I'm going to take the flat side of the cocktail stick against the flat side of the bridge. And I really hate super glue. This time there's a little clog, and then to squeeze it out, it splurted, and then I had way too much super glue all over my bridge, and that was super annoying because it's super glue, so it's super annoying, but got there in the end. I know this is a simple bridge, so you could probably just hit it with some brown wash and it would look okay, but I'm going to paint mine. Really simple color scheme. So I'm just starting with my black primer because it's the only primer I have. I'm being really careful here with the primer to get in every little crack to get rid of the original wood color. Now for my base coat, I just want a dark brown, so I'm using Proacryl's Dark Umber. Now I want that all over the bridge. I'm going to cover all of the surfaces. Not going to bother too much fully underneath the bridge because I'm never going to look there. Now as my first color up from that, I'm going to use a lighter brown, and so I'm going to use Army Painter's Leather Brown. And I'm going to get this over, most of the top surfaces of the bridge. I still want some of that darker brown to show through, especially on the crossbeams, but a lot of this lighter brown all over the top surfaces of the bridge. Okay, now to give it a bit more texture and highlight, I'm going to dry brush with an even lighter brown. So this time I'm using Citadel's Xandri Dust, and I'm just using a massive dry brush and sort of dry brushing all over on the top. And I'm sort of especially focusing on the edges of the bridge at either end because I figure they will get a bit more wear and tear. And that's the simple bridge for Shatterpoint done. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got some ideas out of it. And subscribe if you want some more hobby fun times.